Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Once again, this week we continue our series of tributes to people who we lost last year in 2020. One person, I think about midway through the year last year, may not be known to too many people, but you've definitely heard his music, Ennio Morricone. And he was a pretty famous and extremely prolific composer of film scores, especially during the 60s and 70s, well into the 80s, starting out, of course, in Italian cinema and crossing over into a ton of productions. And so, we lost him last year, and we have done some films on this podcast that he has scored. And he did, in fact, score a couple Giallo picks that I would love to get to. But knowing that Craig would probably send a gloved killer to my house to murder me if I made him go through another Giallo pick, especially so soon after we did Tenebrae a couple weeks ago, I decided to pick one that both he and I were very interested in seeing. And this is 1977's Orca, the killer whale.
Yep.
Basically a Jaws knockoff. Mm-hmm. Produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who specialized in this sort of thing. I guess the story that I read was that De Laurentiis called Luciano Vincenzoni, a writer that he collaborated with or worked with quite a lot, in the middle of the night and was like, hey, we need to do some kind of Jaws thing. And the guy had admitted that he had seen Jaws and started to research killer whales, and found that there's a lot of subject matter there. There's a lot you can play with on the killer whale angle, maybe even argue that they're a little more dangerous than great white sharks are. And so they took that and ran with it and came up with what I think ends up being more Moby Dick than Jaws.
Yeah.
It has its moments. I was really excited to see this movie just because it's the film that I grew up hearing a lot about. You know, we just kind of knew it was there. Maybe it showed up on TV every once in a while. Knew about it as this Jaws knockoff I always intended to see and never got to see until now. So here we are. We're able to talk about the movie, talk about the score behind it, and tribute to Ennio Morricone. How about you, Craig? Had you seen it?
No, I hadn't. Like you said, just like you, I had been aware of it and had thought that it was, kind of a Jaws knockoff, whatever, killer whale terrorizing people in this small community. When we were talking about, doing this tribute, you did throw out a couple of things, and to be fair to me, I said, we can do whatever you want. If you want to do another Giallo, we can.
I've been married long enough to know sometimes when people say something, you might want to think twice about following them down that road.
No, it's fine. You very graciously said. And I just said, I've always been interested in seeing this just because I knew it existed, and I don't know, it's not as though I necessarily heard a lot about it. I just knew that it was out there, and I just expected that being a Jaws knockoff, that it was going to be bad, and that's what I said to you. I'm like, dude, pick what you want. Orca's going to be bad. I want to see it eventually, but it's going to be bad. And then I watched it, and I didn't think it was that bad.
No.
I thought it was perfectly fine.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, you're absolutely right. It's probably better than a lot of the sequels to Jaws ended up being.
It is. And really, in terms of a lot of things, really, there were things that I really liked about it. Like, there's a lot of real-life whale footage and underwater photography.
Yeah.
And it looks really good. And even the fake whales that they use look shockingly real. Like, I read that they used a couple of big fake rubber, I guess, whales, but when they were transporting one of them, they got stopped by animal advocacy groups who thought that they were actually transporting real live animals. That's how realistic they looked. And they used footage of real whales from like a SeaWorld type place. It wasn't SeaWorld, but a place like that. And obviously you can tell that some of the footage, like with the whales jumping out of the water and stuff, you can tell that it's superimposed over other settings. But for the most part, the whales look surprisingly real. They did have to do a lot of edit cuts for like attack sequences and stuff, and those don't look so convincing. Yeah. But other than that, it looks pretty good. And I was surprisingly moved in parts of this. Like, there were parts that kind of upset me visually, and I don't know. I was very surprised. I don't think it's a great movie. It's not a classic by any stretch of the imagination, but I was really pleasantly surprised. I went into it expecting it to be really bad, and it really wasn't.
No. I completely agree with you. And, you have some very competent people working on this movie. The director, Michael Anderson, is kind of a classic director from the 50s, and he did Logan's Run the year before this, which is a movie I've always enjoyed. The writer has written a ton of stuff. For a Few Dollars More, the sequel to Fistful of Dollars, and then The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Even up into the 80s, he wrote Raw Deal, which was a Schwarzenegger action pick. And then, of course, it's a Dino De Laurentiis production, so the production value is pretty good. It's sort of lower high budget good, right? There's some stuff that's kind of fake, but then there's some surprisingly good scenes and things where you think, okay, yeah, they clearly spent a bit of money on this one. Mm-hmm. And then the actors, Richard Harris is the star. And, he is just a veteran of, even by this point, stage and screen. And up until he played the Albus Dumbledore in the first two Harry Potter movies.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I couldn't figure out where I knew him from, and I totally forgotten that he was in that.
Yeah, great Irish actor. And then this happens to be Bo Derek's screen debut. Uh-huh. It's not the first movie she played in, but the first movie that she played in didn't get released until after this movie was released. So this was her first appearance on the screen, and she has a bit part, but she
looks pretty.
She looks very pretty. Yeah, it's really nice. She doesn't have a lot to do, but she does look pretty.
Yeah.
Even Robert Carradine has a small part in here, who plays a guy named Ken, and I was like, oh yeah, of course, he's one of the Carradines, right? I think he's John Carradine's son. Those of us, again, from the 80s will remember him. He's the main guy. He's the main nerd in Revenge of the Nerds, the dude with a goofy laugh.
Oh, yeah.
Skolnick, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. That's so funny.
Crazy, right?
I had no idea.
Yeah. He's got almost a blink, and you'd miss it roll. It's like he's in the beginning, and then you never see him for a while, and then towards the end, he pops in, and I was like, who's that guy? Oh, that's right. That's the guy from the beginning of the movie.
He looks very different than he looked in Revenge of the Nerds. Like, he's so nerdy in that movie. He looks totally different. I would have never recognized him.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's some great stars in this film, some very good stars. And then, of course, the score, Ennio Morricone. And it's a lovely score, I think.
It really is. I have to say, like, the movie opens up with just this, with Whale Song, first of all, over the initial opening credits. And then it's just a lot of shots of orcas jumping out of the water. Ever since the release of Blackfish, I've been very, very torn about these marine attractions like SeaWorld and stuff. Mm-hmm. But when I was a kid, my parents took me to SeaWorld. Well, actually, we went to Orlando, Florida, and we went to, like, all of the amusement parks. Disney, Universal, MGM, all of these parks. But our favorite by far was SeaWorld. We just absolutely loved it. And we saw the orca shows. And they were amazing to see. These enormous creatures that could just literally perform these incredible feats, jumping out of the water. And of course, this was in the 80s when the trainers were still allowed to swim and perform with them.
Yeah.
So jumping out of the water with a trainer balanced on their nose and, diving off, when they're at the peak of their jump. And sometimes, if you were lucky, they would do like meet and greets with the whales, and you would get to pet them and stuff. And I think that I got to do that. I don't remember. I was a little kid, so I don't remember if I got to like sit on a dolphin or pet one of the whales or what, but it was just such an amazing experience. And now knowing what I know about the conditions that those animals are kept in, and it's really quite sad.
Yeah.
But God, I'm still torn about it because it's it's one of my fondest childhood memories. But anyway, you get all this great footage of them jumping and swimming underwater, scored by this orchestral score that's very beautiful and really highlights the beauty of the natural setting and these majestic creatures. Even had we not been thinking about the score because this was a tribute, I would have noticed it because it's very fitting and it really does a lot to set the mood, not only in the beginning but in later, like, heart-wrenching parts of the movie too. I thought it was great.
In the very, very beginning, I mean, one of the first things we see before we even see too much of the whales is just an oscilloscope, and we hear the sounds of the whales talking to each other as they're recorded, and there's a very minimalist kind of score underneath this that gradually builds to, the more orchestral score. But I thought it was really neat what he did there, where he used trumpets, and the trumpets sound like the whales. It was a really cool, like a mimicking of the whale sound with the trumpets. And we don't hear that again, really, I think, in the rest of the movie, but it was a really interesting way to bring the music into the film very, very slowly and very gradually as the visual does. We've got this bare oscilloscope on the screen, and then slowly but surely we start to see all this beautiful, wonderful underwater footage and above water footage of these whales jumping down. Footage which I might add, we're going to see a lot more of later. There's one particular shot, and when you watch it, you almost have to laugh, especially the beginning, because it's one of those too good to be true shots where there's like a sun setting, but though it's kind of dark outside, and there are two whales that at the same time leap up into the air and arch backwards and go back down, which you can tell is the same shot that's just been reversed.
Yeah.
So it looks like two whales. And you could tell it's sort of superimposed over the scene. That was probably shot at Marine World or wherever.
Yeah.
And then that very same shot gets superimposed like 5 more times.
True.
At least in the rest of the movie. But it's fine because it's the late 70s. It's the best they could do with what they had, and I thought it was acceptable.
Yeah.
Because there's so much footage.
It's not CGI. Frankly, I would rather see that than CGI.
Oh, yeah. God, yeah. Exactly. So somebody's recording these sounds, and then we see the beach, and there's a recorder, nice little reel-to-reel recorder, following a line down into the water, and then there's a scuba diver under the water who's going down to either adjust the equipment or maybe retrieve the microphone, and is frightened by a shark, and this shark starts threatening this diver. And he's trying to hide from the shark, and you think the shark's going to kind of get him, and then a boat comes in and sort of scares the shark away, and the boat is the Bumpo. And here on the Bumpo is our main character, Nolan. Nolan is the grizzled seafarer, dashing in his mid-40s or whatever, who is out there hunting for... Is he hunting sharks at this point, or is he actually hunting
He is
whales?
hunting... No, he's hunting that... It's a great white shark, and he's hunting it, but not to kill it. He wants to capture it because Marine World or, whatever, one of those places, gosh, the best word I can come up with has put a bounty out. They want to capture a live specimen. And so that's what he's trying to do. But he's interrupted by Ken, who's in a small boat, like a buoy with a motor, who comes up and says, you can't shoot at it. Or I don't know.
There's a diver in
There's a diver down, right? Mm-hmm. And the diver comes up, and you kept saying
him.
Yeah, it's a chick. Her name is Rachel, and she is a scientist, I think. She's studying the whales. It's kind of a weird scene. Like, Ken takes her, he pulls her into his little buoy, and then he takes her over to the fishing boat, and she boards the fishing boat, and then he goes I guess he's going back to shore. I don't know, but something happens and he falls out of the boat.
It's the way I would fall out of a boat. It just looks super clumsy. But he falls into the water, and of course there's that shark, and now it's dangerous, right? The shark's coming at him, and then suddenly, out of the blue, this killer whale comes in and takes out the shark. And I thought this was so great. This movie's like middle finger to Jaws. Like, oh, you think Jaws is scary? We're about to top it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because you see the killer whale approaching very quickly, and then it knocks the shark and shoots it 40 feet into the air.
Yeah, these things, the killer whales in this movie do nothing better than pushing stuff around. They're really,
they are
really good at bumping up against things and pushing them around. So
very talented.
It's great.
But it kills it, and so everybody's fine. And then we cut, Rachel's giving a seminar or something, and she's talking about killer whales, and she has a whole monologue. But she talks about how they're the most powerful animal in the world, but she also makes a point of saying that they have a profound instinct for vengeance.
Yeah. a couple times, right? Is this foreshadowing or something? I don't know.
Yet the most amazing thing about these creatures is neither their gentleness nor their violence, but their brains. Slides, please, Ken.
She shows this picture of this brain of an orca as compared to a human's, and it's at least as big, and maybe it's even got a lot more folds in it, which would indicate pretty high intelligence. Like Moby Dick, you're going to learn a lot about killer whales in this movie in a very short amount of time. Actually, the producer and director of Blackfish referenced Orca several times, I guess, in that movie. I don't remember. I did see Blackfish. It was quite a while ago. But I got in this dialogue there in this article where they were talking about, the misconceptions and the kind of the balance that you kind of have when you approach this, because they're not called killer whales because they run around and kill things. It's because they kill whales. Orcas will actually take down whales bigger than themselves.
Oh, yeah.
They're sometimes called the wolves of the sea.
Yeah.
But also they're very closely related to dolphins. We all know dolphins are super intelligent. Mm-hmm. And so there are these lovable aspects of them as well. They are playful. They do have these sort of family groups. One thing that the movie also emphasizes as we get in, which becomes very, very important, is that they will find a mate for life.
Yeah, but that's not true.
It's not true. Yeah, it's like the males are just they basically kind of like dolphins. They just bang everybody and everything, and usually not even with their consent.
Well, I was actually really fascinated. I was fascinated by this because they made such a point of saying that they're monogamous and they stay with their same partner and with their families their whole life, and that's not true. But I mean, it's kind of based in reality because they do stay in their own pods.
Yeah.
But male orcas stay in their mother's pod. And then female orcas go outside of their pods to mate, we suppose, to avoid inbreeding. But I guess science thought that orcas were monogamous because they stayed with the same women all their life. But those are their mothers and sisters that they don't mate with, and other females come in and mate with them and then go back to their own pods. But for the purpose of the movie, it works well and it's believable. And the whole setup is that this Nolan guy, when he realizes that he's not going to get his shark and he sees how vicious these killer whales can be, he's like, oh, well, okay, instead I'll capture a killer whale. They go out looking for them and find them immediately. But again, it's this beautiful footage of this pod of whales swimming together, and it is really majestic to see these huge groups of these enormous animals swimming together, surfacing in unison, and this is all real footage, and it looks really cool. And for the purpose of the movie, because they look so majestic, and because we've been fed this line about how they stay together, even though it's a little bit off factually, I felt sentimental about them. I didn't want this guy to go out and hurt any one of them. But even one of his lady crew members, I think it's Bo Derek, says you know they mate for life, and he's like, oh no, really, I didn't know that. And she's like, so if we take one, we could be breaking up a family. And he's just like, that's a real head scratcher or whatever.
But go ahead and load up the syringe.
Yeah, load up the syringe.
The tranquilizer.
And they find the pod, and he just kind of very recklessly, Captain Ahab style, crawls up on the perch and points his harpoon and shoots, and he grazes a male. And it's an important plot point. Like, he takes a chunk out of its fin.
Convenient for us.
Yeah, convenient for us. But the harpoon ends up hitting a female. And I swear, like, I don't know if you felt the same way, but this almost made me sick. Like, physically
it was pretty
sick.
Brutal.
Yeah, it was very brutal. And because I don't know if this is realistic or not. I do know that whales do vocalize, but in this moment, like, this whale is screaming. It upsets even him. Even Nolan is like, and it's screaming and it's thrashing and it gets all tangled up in the rope, and the male is looking on, and they drag this female in.
Well, she also is like coming up against the propeller of the boat.
Oh yeah, They say she's trying to kill herself.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. That was kind of weird. But yeah, he pulls him up. It pulls her up out of the water. And this is so interesting, the way that this was filmed, where they have this whale up by the tail, hanging. And as they're dragging it over and across, hanging over the boat, she's still alive.
Yeah.
She's, and her mouth is moving. And like you said, it's a pretty realistic... it's not thrashing around, but it probably wouldn't be. But it's just enough, to be realistic enough. And you're like, oh, God, and there's blood there and everything. And the male whale, his head is like above water, like he's watching what's going on. And also kind of screaming. And I mean, almost to the point where it was a little cheesy.
Yes, it definitely was, but it still got me. I mean, you know that I'm an animal lover, and just to see an animal in pain and clearly in fear, and I know it's fake. I know it's a movie. But it just kind of, it was a gut punch. And then it's hanging there bleeding, and this part is probably super unrealistic. But it expels an unborn fetus. And this is fake. Like, it's totally fake, but it looks real. Like, they really did a good job with these effects, because it looks real. And it expels this fetus. And when Rachel had been doing her lecture, she had shown pictures of a 4-month-old whale fetus, and she had made note of how much it looks like a human fetus. And I have no idea if that's true, but the picture that she showed, it did very much look like a human fetus. And so when the whale expels it, it doesn't look like a person, but it has some kind of human characteristics, and it clearly freaks Nolan out, and he's like, get it off the boat, get it off the boat. and he uses a hose to spray it off the boat. But at the same time, God, this is traumatic.
It is. It is traumatic. And there's these close-ups on the whale's eye, which is another thing we're going to get a lot more of. Like, it's looking at him, and at one point Nolan's face is superimposed in the eye, like, I see you, marking you. But
right.
Once again, like you mentioned, the thing that really got me about this scene is all of this really disturbs Nolan. Like, clearly, every bit of it has been disturbing him from the moment he harpooned that thing and it started screaming, to they brought it up on board, to the reaction of the male, and then this fetus, which just is like the cherry on top, just flops out unceremoniously, which, again, was kind of silly, but it was just this entire disaster. Mm-hmm. This guy who's presumably his career is he's out there, he's a fisherman. I mean, he's not experienced with whales, obviously, but he's clearly an experienced guy at harpooning other things. The worst possible thing is happening right in front of him, and it bothers the heck out of him. Yeah. And I think that did a lot to instantly get on his side in this. It did a lot to instantly make him a sympathetic character, I think, in this movie, which was essential, really, I think, for it going on. Like, I didn't want him to be callous, but he had to be bullied into doing what he needed to do. He takes some convincing, but it's not because he doesn't give a crap about animals.
Yeah.
Or at least in this particular circumstance.
Well, that surprised me about the movie, because I did expect him to just be this callous guy, and I expected, like, you know, if there was going to be, you know, this whale that was out for vengeance against him or whatever, that he was just going to be the Captain Ahab type that was, you know, going to be
hard-ass,
right?
Me against you, we're going to get you, kind of thing.
And it surprised me in that it's not that at all. Like, he's immediately regretful. Like, I already had a preconceived notion of him just from his kind of cocky attitude from the beginning, but then it shifts, and he's clearly remorseful for what he's done. He doesn't really understand the gravity of it at first, but he talks to Rachel about it, and she explains, you know, these deep connections that these whales have, and he kind of feels bad. And then so the whale is hanging there, and then it's nighttime, and then the male whale starts battering the boat. And so Nolan says, is the female still alive? And somebody says, I can't imagine how, but yes, she is. And he's like, drop her back in, you know, get her off the boat. And so they do, but right as soon as they do, the boat is already kind of tipped because of the weight of the whale and the barrage of the beatings from the male. One of the crew people is hanging from, like, one of those lookout posts or something. I don't know, whatever.
It's like the mast, yeah, where he cut her down from. It's like a horizontal mast, yeah.
And the male jumps up and grabs him and kills him. And not eats him, but grabs him, and he's dead.
Yeah, bites him right off the side and takes him down. Oh, and I think this is the point, actually, where the male surfaces again and looks at Nolan, and Nolan's face is in his eye, and Nolan looks at the whale, and he kind of realizes, oh my God, you know.
It's goofy, but for this type of movie, it worked. Like,
oh, it does. Because the next scene, is long, and it's basically sun is coming up, and this whale is pushing the female along. And the music here is almost like a funeral dirge.
Yes!
My God. And this is so long and so dramatic and actually so well filmed, I thought.
I thought so too, and I was sad. It felt like a funeral because the male is pushing the female, but the rest of the pod is with him. It felt like a funeral. Now, I have no idea if anything... No, that's a lie. I was going to say I have no idea if anything like this really happens. It does. Whales do mourn their dead. There was a recorded instance of a mother whale who had given birth, and I don't remember if the calf was stillborn or if it died soon after birth, but she pushed it for, I think, hundreds of miles on the migration, and scientists had no idea why she would do that, and they just eventually came to the conclusion that she was mourning. And wow. It's deep.
Yeah.
You know, as I eat my cheeseburgers every day, I try not to think about animals having those kind of feelings, but clearly some of them do. And the way that they treat it with the cinematography and the score, it's emotionally impactful. I was moved.
Yeah. I mean, your cheeseburger had a mom, you know?
I know.
Think about that, but it's true.
No, I don't. But what I was getting to about Nolan feeling guilty, he talks to Rachel and she explains some of these things to him, but then he goes to the crew member's funeral and he talks to a priest.
What I was meaning to ask you, like, can you commit a sin against an animal?
Oh, you can commit a sin against a blade of grass. Sins are really against oneself.
From that point on, he understands kind of the weight of what he has done. Plus, he's reminded because the whale's coming to get him.
Exactly. Well, he ends up here on the shore where the whale had basically beached the female. And so they're in this kind of fishing town, and he's docked there, and he meets the doctor and he meets the priest. But he also meets a guy named Jacob, who's probably a native of the area or something. Maybe that's the idea anyway. But he's Will Sampson, who...
I know.
Yeah, from Poltergeist 2 and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I was just instantly recognizable, and I thought, oh yeah, this is this guy who's in all these movies. And I went to IMDb, and I'm like, no, he has actually not been in a lot of movies. He's just been in like 3 or 4 high-profile films.
Huh. Yeah, I recognized him right away. He's Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, that's an amazing movie, an amazing role. And I really enjoyed him in Poltergeist 2 also.
Yeah, me too.
He doesn't have a whole lot to do here, except for that he can tell Nolan some of the natives' mythology about these killer whales and
how they have memories, and more about how they have vengeance and all that stuff. And
and he tells him, if I were you, I would stay far from this territory. But he doesn't. And the harbor master comes and talks to him too. I assume it's the harbor master. His name's Al Swain. He says he's in charge around these parts or whatever.
The local fishermen's union.
Yeah. And he warns him, like, it's interesting how he approaches him, because he's not outwardly threatening, but his meaning is very clear. And he warns him that some people around here think that orcas in the area will drive away their fish, which is their livelihood. Basically what he's telling him is, get the hell out of here. You know, like, you brought this scourge on us. Get it out of here. And immediately after that, we see that the orca is in the harbor, and it comes up and just destroys all of the fishing boats except for Nolan's.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Yeah.
Well, it punches holes in the bottom of them all. It's crazy, this scene. You know, once again, they're not coming after him like with pitchforks and trying to get him out of there. It's like just strongly suggested that he leave. And a little bit later on, the Al guy says to him, we decided we're going to fix up your boat first so that you can take off. He ends up kind of drunk, and he's kind of trying to figure out what to do because they're burying the whale, I guess. They want him to leave. In the meantime, he has a discussion with her, and then the guy says, hey, the whale was spotted up by the North Point. Rachel, says, don't go to North Point. Don't go up there. Well, he goes up there to...
Yeah, after he's like, no, I totally won't. And the very next scene, he's there. This scene, if any of them, I thought was kind of silly, but I still didn't hate it. Like it's dark, and there's just a red light on the end of the dock. And, like, he looks out and he doesn't see anything, so he turns around, and then he hears a splash, so he turns back. And that happens, like, 3 times.
Like 2 more times. Oh, nothing.
It goes on for a while. And then he turns back and he finally sees it, and it surfaces and it screams at him. It
gives him the stink eye again.
It gives him the stink eye. And it's just, the orca's head sticking up out of the dark water, illuminated by this red light, screaming at him. And I think, again, you kind of see Nolan's reflection in his eyes. It's heavy-handed, but I don't know. It didn't bother me. I was into this movie.
Well, then there's a quick cut of a car going off the road that just pops in and pops out, and then we're in the next scene where he wakes up the next morning, and I was like, car went off. What was this about the car going off the road? And then I realized, it must be some vision or some flashback or something we're going to get. It's going to be explained later. He wakes up in the home in which he is staying in, which is a house that's completely up on stilts over the outside edge of the shore. And the minute, I swear to you, the minute I saw him, because this is the thing that I'm always thinking about in these Jaws and killer whale movies, is like, if you don't go in the water, you're absolutely fine.
Stay out of the water, you dumbass. Right?
So the minute I saw that they were in this house on stilts over the sea, I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I see where this is going to go. I'm sure that somehow the whale's going to attack this house. And I wasn't disappointed. But first, he comes out of the house and stands out there, and Jacob tells him he really should go hunt the whale because everyone's super pissed at him.
There's a really funny story about, whale voodoo dolls, too.
They have the shaman sew a small skin whale and stuff it with the livers of birds. They make piss water on it and throw it into the sea with some words. If all has been done right, the monster spirit flies out of its mouth, and he is dead.
I was hoping for that scene, but they don't do that.
No. Oh my gosh.
Well, then there's a silly scene where Nolan sets up a dummy of himself at the end of the pier, and it's as though he's going to shoot it, but Rachel shows up and says, "Oh no, you can't do this. The whale wants to." He's not going to show up because he wants to fight you at
his
sea.
plan is that he's going to go look the whale in the eye and
apologize.
You said they were intelligent. I'm just going to wait till he surfaces. I'm going to look him in the eye and apologize and hope he accepts my apology.
Oh, gosh, that was so... he was going to shoot it, but then he realized he didn't want to. Instead, he just wanted to talk to it. And, some point later in the movie, it's implied that he can, understand the whale now. She asks him, what is he thinking? And he's like, he's thinking this. He can understand. But it's really funny. But it turns out that he wants to apologize because he says the same thing happened to me. He understands why the whale is so angry because the same thing happened to him. His wife was pregnant.
Who was pregnant.
Yeah. And on her way to the hospital, I guess to give birth, she was killed by a drunk driver. So it explains why he was so upset by that whole fetus episode.
But how convenient, right?
Super convenient. But he does. I mean, he legitimately feels bad. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the orca blows up the whole town. This was hilarious.
He just knows how everything works. He just surfaces out of the water and knocks some gas pipes away, which, run around, I guess, to some buildings, and then he bangs the bottom of another building and makes a lantern fall down and light it up. And not only does it just... Actually, this was a cool scene, right? Because it's all practical. It just flames are just going all across the entire bay and everything that's there, right up the mountain to where there's oil refinery or something.
Right.
And that thing completely explodes.
And the whale just revels in it. It's out off the coast, jumping out of the water. It's so happy.
Same arching through the air kind of thing that we saw earlier, superimposed.
He's really proud of himself. Yes! Blew up the whole town.
Oh, man.
So the harbor master guy or the lead fisherman or whatever shows up, or no, he calls him, a very ominous call, and says, your boat will be done in the morning. You and your crew need to get out of here, and if you don't, there's going to be trouble, basically. So Nolan tells the crew to get out of town, and one of them, the guy, goes off to fuel up the car or something, I don't know. And Nolan calls Rachel and tells him that he's going to go after the whale, and then she somehow talks him out of it. It's a whole psychology thing. I didn't even get it. I kind of lost her train of thought. He's just dangerous and angry, and who do you owe more to, the whale or these townspeople? And he's like, oh, I guess the whale. What? I don't...
Yeah.
It was weird.
It was so weird because, earlier, and he even says this, earlier you were trying to tell me that, I need to go out and, make amends with it and whatever. And she's like, well, earlier I just told you that because I didn't think you were remorseful enough.
Yeah.
But I didn't really mean it. Now that I see you're remorseful, I'm telling you shouldn't go. It was dumb.
Yeah.
But, she's going to be along for the ride. And then Jacob just kind of offhandedly offers that he can help too. He tells who's this guy? We haven't even mentioned this guy.
It's not Ken. It's
Paul, played by Peter Hooton. Yeah, Paul, the male crew member who's kind of banging Bo Derek's character the whole time. He runs into Jacob at the gas thing, and Jacob's like, look, you got to tell him he's got to get out of town, and I'll even go with you guys to help out. And so,
well, but the townspeople aren't going to just let them leave. They're forcing them to leave on the boat because they want them to take the whale with them.
Right.
Paul is trying to gas up the car so that he can take Bo Derek
and
out of there, but they're not going to let them go. And Jacob says he has to fight it, but I'll help if you want. And then the whale attacks the house, which I assumed that he would, and I was surprised that he hadn't already. He knocks out the supports underneath. I don't remember. The girl's name is Annie. Bo Derek is Annie, and she had been injured before.
Yeah.
When the whale had, like, hit the boat, she had broken her ankle or something, so she's in a cast. So the house is tilted because the supports have been knocked out, so it's tilted down towards the ocean, and she is sliding down, and they try to rescue her, but the whale jumps up and bites her leg off. And then celebrates again.
Yes. It's wonderful.
And then Nolan very dramatically says,
"You want revenge? Well, you'll have it! I'll come out and fight you! I'll fight you! You're a vengeful son of a bitch!"
Oh, it's so dramatic, but it's cool. It's cool dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exactly what you expected. There were two things here. First of all, once again, like the production value of this movie was pretty high.
Yeah.
To have this very elaborate and I think well-filmed and very tense scene of them. I knew she was going to get it. I thought the whale was just going to chomp her. This movie has no qualms killing people off, and that was, that was refreshing. But,
well, and I thought she was dead because the attack scenes are very brief. They're super, super quick because they have to do interesting things with cutting because obviously, they're not filming real whales attacking people. So they're very quick cuts. I saw that it chomped her, and I just assumed that she was dead. But Nolan says later, like, 3 people dead and 1 poor girl maimed for the rest of her life or whatever. So she's not dead.
Well, the other thing, speaking to the score, is there's an interesting choice being made here. The Jaws score is pretty iconic because it really builds its tension every time Jaws is coming. There's that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you'd think that a movie that's kind of ripping off Jaws would really try to up that, over-dramatize, especially because this score does go into this sort of dramatic territory and these quiet and nice scenes. But here, when the whale is coming, all we hear are whale sounds and this kind of minimalist, it's like a screeching or scratching over, I don't know, steel drums or something. Wires of a piano. I'm not sure exactly what it is, and it's repeated multiple times through the movie, but I think it was a good choice. I mean, at least it made the movie stand out a little bit, made it a little different from Jaws. I don't know. I think one could argue that maybe there's not as much suspense in this movie, that maybe it's not as suspenseful as it could have been.
I don't know. I think it's fair that it may not be that suspenseful, but it's fast paced. Like it's never boring.
For sure.
It moves. You know me and my attention span. As we've said a million times, for me, the biggest sin of a movie, any movie, but especially a horror movie, is if it's boring.
Right.
And this movie is not boring.
Definitely.
It moves and moves. I mean, the next day they leave, and the Orca shows up, and there's some stupid dynamite accident that I don't even understand. Like,
I didn't understand that either.
Like Nolan, they find the whale, or the whale finds them, or whatever, and then he's going to throw some dynamite in the water. Now, I don't know if that was to disable the whale. I mean, I know that unethical people fish that way, because the shock waves stun or kill the fish. But Rachel won't let him, so she's fighting him, and she knocks the dynamite back onto the boat, and then she has to run, and it ends up in the water anyway, and nothing comes of it. So
yeah.
It's just kind of stupid. I don't know. But then I loved this part, the whale. I couldn't figure out what it was doing. It taunts them. It's putting its tail fin up above the water and waving at them, and then it puts its side fin up and is waving at them. But apparently Nolan can understand it now, and it knows that it's telling them it wants them to follow it.
It's so hilarious. It's cartoonish, right?
It is. It's silly, but whatever. I was totally down. And then I don't know, Ken is in the lifeboat for some reason that I didn't understand, and the whale jumps up and eats him. And so I keep saying eat. It doesn't. It just kills them. Yeah. And then the whale, like Rachel and Nolan are in the underbelly or whatever you call it of the boat, and they can hear the whale song. And like I said before, she's like, "What is it thinking?" And he's like, he's saying, "You're my drunk driver." Like he totally understands why it's mad at him.
Yeah. I mean, the notion, the whole thing here is that he's kind of also getting obsessive and crazy. You know, it's the Moby Dickish kind of thing.
Exactly.
And then the other crew members kind of play this up too. Like Paul talks to Rachel and says, "You're getting to be as crazy as Nolan." Once again, for reasons I don't quite understand. And then he kind of puts together, he says, Nolan says, "Oh, it's leading us up north." I mean, they must be going on for days just following this whale. Know. And even after it's killed one of their crew members, and Paul mentions, hey, do you know if Nolan radioed in that Ken was killed? Because surely they would have, required us to turn back and to shore, and we haven't yet. But he somehow puts together, the whale's leading us up north to where their ice flows, to take us into these waters where it's going to damage our ship. But then he also says, but he's not as smart as I thought he was, because if he goes there and he's going to be underneath the ice, he won't be able to surface. To
breathe.
Okay.
But they keep following him, and it is silly, it doesn't make any sense, and I really don't know where they started out, but they very quickly get into Arctic waters with icebergs everywhere. And as silly as that may be, it looks fantastic.
It does.
And I was it was a great place for the final act of this piece. I mean, it looks treacherous. Jacob's with them, by the way. He talks about how they don't have enough fuel to get back, and Nolan's like, well, once it's all done, you guys can call for a helicopter or whatever. Rachel's like, what do you mean you guys can call back? And he just looks on ominously, like he knows he's not gonna survive this or whatever.
Right.
And so there's tons of icebergs and stuff. And Nolan he doesn't tell a story, but he just says that in his attempt to capture the shark and in his attempt to capture the whale, all he wanted to do was raise enough money to go back home, because he realized that the sea life wasn't for him or whatever. And he says, tomorrow will be the day, prophetically. And then he says, obviously the whale loved his family more than I loved mine. Okay.
I know. I can write this off a little bit, and just by saying he's just going a little crazy, right? So the stupidity of it is maybe just Nolan going crazy and being stupid. I'll be generous enough to the writer to say that. They get into some issue, right? They're going through the ice flows or whatever. They're ramming into things, and Paul decides he's going to split. I guess he goes up to one of the hanging lifeboats and he starts tossing things onto it.
Didn't I already say that? Didn't I say he got eaten?
Are you sure? I thought you were talking about Ken. Ken got eaten the first time, right?
I don't know.
Who gets eaten first, Paul or Ken? I can't remember. They both get eaten about the same way. They're in some lifeboat, and then the orca comes up and eats them.
On this particular outing, whichever one of them is not already eaten
gets eaten.
Well, and I don't know if it's Paul or Ken, but I was reading, in the trivia or whatever, that it's ironic that Ken gets killed by the whale because the whale had rescued him from the shark earlier in the movie.
The whale doesn't like him anymore.
He rescued him earlier, but now he's like, screw you, if you're going to hang out with my arch nemesis. And so the morning comes, and Jacob is like, he holds a gun on Nolan, and he's like, we're going back or whatever. But then the orca pushes an iceberg at them. And Nolan's like, get me the harpoon. He has to come up for air, and he does. It's a handheld like spear harpoon. Like, surely they don't even really make those anymore. No. Like, who is harpooning whales with handheld spears?
Yeah.
Nolan, apparently. But he does harpoon it like right above its head, and it cries. But then the iceberg hits the boat. Jacob is crushed and killed by falling ice from the iceberg. The boat totally sinks, and Nolan and Rachel jump onto like an ice float. And what I was thinking was like, it really doesn't matter how this turns out at this point because you're dead. Like,
yeah.
what are you gonna do? You're floating on like this 15 by 15 ice float in the Arctic Ocean, and nobody knows you're there. Like, the whale can get you, or you can freeze to death. Like, these are your options.
We know he's dead, but we also know Rachel's going to be alive because we've been hearing Rachel narrate every now and then.
The whole thing.
The whole thing, yeah, which was kind of annoying. I thought that cheapened the movie a little bit. Like, she just said...
I did too.
There was nothing that she said that wasn't already obvious.
Exactly.
Didn't need to happen. But yeah, but this part, I mean, it was so classic adventure movie, right?
I loved it.
That's what I loved about it. Like, yeah, like now we're on the ice floats, like, and they're running around, and the whale's bashing up through the bottom, and they're running, and then like they get kind of on land to this ice cave, but he slips and falls down back onto the ice float, which cracks away, and the whale pushes him on this ice float, almost again like a Looney Tunes cartoon, you know. This one guy's out on this sheet of ice that's floating away, and he can't get back onto land, and then it comes up and it comes over the edge, and I was watching this with my wife, and she was like, oh yeah. And the whale completely tips this thing up on its edge, and he slides down it like a slide, and I thought it was going to be straight into the whale's mouth or something, you know.
I did too.
But it didn't happen. He falls in the water.
But what I was thinking, like, as old-timey adventure movie as this was, these killer whales are super smart, and they do this shit. I have seen actual footage of them doing this. Like, they will get sea lions or whatever, you know, trapped on these ice floats, and then their entire pods will organize and will systematically like swim at them to tip them off, and it's crazy. They are really smart, and they are ruthless killers. I mean, they're hunters. It's nature. They're, you know, they need to eat too.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy how innovative they can be. So as cartoonish as this looks, I was like, yeah, that whale could really do that.
For sure.
But it gets him down into the water, and then it's circling him, and it uses its tail to throw Nolan up out of the water against an ice wall, and he dies and sinks into the water. And I thought, oh, well, that was silly too. And then I was reading, they do that too.
Oh, really?
Yes, they do that to sea lions and stuff. They will flip them out of the water with their tails against rocks or icebergs or whatever to stun or kill them, and then they'll eat them. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. Well, don't dolphins also like kill sea lions somehow and then play with their corpses, like bat them around like
dolphins
like balls
are nasty
or something?
fuckers.
Yeah.
They'll straight up rape you.
Well, really? Have you had? I've swum with a dolphin.
I mean, I haven't had the experience, but they will.
Straight up will. Don't turn your back on a dolphin.
Don't, no. But he dies and sinks into the water, and then the whale looks at Rachel with a tear in its eye.
Literally.
Yes. And then it leaves, it lets her go, and a helicopter arrives. What? Like, where did this helicopter come from?
There was, earlier, Jacob had called an SOS or a Mayday, and he had said, I'm going to put it on auto repeat or something. So I think the implication is sometime between him doing that and the 5 minutes later when the boat sunk, it was enough to call somebody. So yeah. But yeah, you're right. That comes over. And then the last bit is a cool bit of underwater photography where the whale is, going under the ice, and some of it is POV from him, and some of it is of him, and it kind of looks like the whale's trying to get up through the ice but can't. And because earlier we had heard Nolan surmised that the whale might get trapped under the ice and not be able to get up. The implication that I got was that maybe the whale too also died.
Well, I read that was supposed to be the implication, but my feelings about it were that it was so distraught, like, by this series of events that it intentionally killed itself. That was how I read it.
So it could join its wife and son in heaven.
I guess. I hope so. I don't know. That poor whale. The poor whale is the victim in this whole thing. I mean, that scene was traumatic. Him just there in the water, helpless, watching his mate, in such a horrifying circumstance. It really tugged at my heartstrings.
It's so funny when we talk about these movies, Craig, and this violence towards animals. We'll just kind of breeze right through. Yeah, so we're in Hostel, and the guy's chained up, and his arm gets cut off, and they take pliers to his balls and rip out this girl's eye and move on.
Yeah.
It never tugs at your heartstrings like this poor dog getting kicked across a room might. So.
No, see, but for the most part, animals, they don't do anything to deserve it. Those people in the Hostel movies are all kind of jerks.
Assholes.
I don't care what happens to them. But these whales were just minding their business. They weren't hurting anybody.
Eagerly awaiting the birth of their new son.
Right.
So that dad could go leave him and do his own pod and rape a few other whales.
I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised by this movie. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect to at all. If anything, I thought, this will be really fun to talk about because it'll be so bad. We'll have fun goofing on it. And then I was watching and I actually kind of like this. And you said, I do think it's better than some of the Jaws sequels.
It was bad in many ways, though. But it overcame that with just, and now that we've talked about this, and I think we're going to get comments tomorrow because we have been kind of really hitting the fun parts and really talking about how cool some of these set pieces and these scenes are and how emotional some of the bits are, and kind of glossing over the fact that in between all of that, it can be a bit of a slog. It does move, but there's a lot of downtime of just kind of brooding and thinking, talking about the whale and talking about his life.
No more so than in Jaws.
Yeah,
I would say that maybe even less than in Jaws. Like the action, Jaws is a great movie, and I am not trying to disparage it in any way. But the action with the shark, until the end, is
none.
Kind of few and far between.
Yeah.
And here, stuff is happening all the time. Yes, there are moments and scenes of talking that are somewhat unnecessary because it's not like we don't understand what's going on. But I have to disagree with you on that part. I didn't feel that way at all.
Jaws, the first one, though, it's a smarter movie. And so I think that those bits in between are more compelling. And in this movie, if you're not...
It's more character-driven, yeah.
Yeah, and in this movie, if you're not buying into it like we were, and if you're not willing to just forego some of the cheesiness and you can't really get over that, then I think you probably would think that these bits in between are dumb and slow.
Okay. Fair enough.
But, so, I just want to put that out there because people are probably going to comment on it that, it really just depends on what you're willing to put up with and the mindset you're in. I, like you, thought it was a lot of fun. And in many ways, just a very classic adventure story, these big set pieces that they had. Mm-hmm. I, too, was pleasantly surprised. I thought it would be way stupider and way more eye-rolling than it is. And, I think a lot of pieces go into that. Obviously, the acting is pretty great.
Yep.
And it was fun to see these actors that we know and that we love. The story was interesting and different from Jaws, which made it good.
Yep.
It wasn't super exploitative, I would say. It had some strong character elements to it. And once again, a great score to lift it up that you
really
just can't
good.
say a bad thing about. So fitting tribute, I think, to Ennio Morricone for this year.
Agreed. I very much enjoyed it.
All right, well, thank you very much for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed this, please share it with a friend. You can find us online. Just search for Two Guys and a Chainsaw. Find our Facebook page. our homepage, twoguys.red40net.com. Leave us a comment there. Give us some requests, what you'd like us to do. And we have at least one more tribute episode coming up before we might get to some requests. We might get to some other theme episodes. We're just not sure. So let us know what you want. We always enjoy chatting and talking with you. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.